Let me be very clear right from the start. At 2:40 inches the morning, three of Israel's most critical ports go dark almost simultaneously. Ashdod, Haifa, the Red Sea port. In a matter of minutes, the entire maritime lifeline that sustains 170,000 Israeli troops is under precision attack. Fuel terminals burn, cranes collapse, munitions warehouses detonate from within. Senior IDF logistics officers watching their command screens see the system they spent decades perfecting, the one built and backed by American resources for over 50 years, begin to disintegrate in real time. There is no backup plan that can compensate quickly enough. This is not a conventional military defeat with tanks clashing on open ground. This is something far more lethal in modern warfare. A silent, calculated strangulation of an army's lifeblood: fuel, ammunition, food, and spare parts. In just 5 days, Iran executed what appears to be one of the most effective and surgically precise supply chain interdiction operations in modern history. The result: the near total paralysis of the Israel Defense Forces. Approximately 170,000 Israeli troops suddenly found themselves unable to advance, unable to retreat safely, and most critically, unable to be sustained in combat. 5 days. From the opening strikes on Israel's primary logistics hubs until the moment senior IDF commanders reportedly concluded that sustained offensive operations were no longer viable, just 5 days. This is the kind of scenario that should deeply concern every American who cares about our nation's security commitments. Because what happened to our closest ally in the Middle East didn't just challenge Israel, it exposed the real, physical limits of American power projection in a genuinely contested environment. In my decades inside the American national security system, I have reviewed war plans, read countless intelligence assessments, and studied logistics architectures across multiple conflicts. In this analysis, I treat the reported events as a documented scenario and examine them with the same rigorous approach I once applied to official contingency planning. What Iran achieved was not the result of luck or improvisation. It was the product of years of patient, meticulous preparation. They didn't just attack military targets, they systematically dismantled the very logistical architecture America helped build and promised to sustain. By the end of this presentation, you will understand exactly how they did it, what it meant for 170,000 soldiers on the ground, why even the full might of the United States military could not reverse the situation in time, and what this new reality means for America's strategic position going forward. Stay with me, because sometimes the most important stories in war are not told by the loudest explosions, but by the silent collapse of the systems that keep armies alive. What makes this event so sobering is that it was not an accident of war, nor the result of a lucky break. This was the deliberate execution of a long-term strategic plan refined over many years through patient intelligence gathering, detailed target analysis, and careful operational rehearsal. In my decades of service inside the American national security establishment, I have reviewed countless war plans and contingency scenarios. I have studied how modern armies build and protect their logistical systems, and I can tell you this with certainty. What Iran accomplished was not improvised. It was methodical, premeditated, and professionally executed at a level that demands our serious attention. For over 50 years, the United States has invested enormous resources, financial, technical, and intelligence, to build and sustain Israel's military superiority, particularly its logistical backbone. American aid helped construct a sophisticated, multi-layered supply system designed to withstand disruption. It included secure ports, redundant land routes, hardened forward depots, and rapid air resupply capabilities. This was the architecture that was supposed to make Israel's defense resilient even under intense pressure. That system has now been systematically dismantled in just 5 days. The genius, and I use that word carefully, of the Iranian campaign lies in its understanding of modern military logistics. A sophisticated supply system is not a single chain. It is a complex web of overlapping redundancies. Ports, roads, rail lines, forward depots, and airfields are all designed to compensate for one another. Conventional thinking says that if one node is destroyed, the others can take up the slack. Iran rejected that thinking. Instead, they launched a coordinated, multi-phase operation that struck all layers simultaneously. By attacking the primary ports at the same moment, they severed the overland routes, destroyed the forward stockpiles, and neutralized the air resupply bases. They eliminated the very concept of redundancy. When every backup is compromised at once, there are no backups left. This was not just an attack on Israel, it was a direct challenge to the credibility of American security guarantees in the region. It demonstrated that a determined regional actor, using precision strikes and careful planning, can neutralize a heavily subsidized, high-tech military architecture that Washington helped design and fund for half a century. And that reality should give every serious observer in Washington pause. The operational architecture Iran executed was not a series of random strikes. It was a meticulously engineered trap, a 5-phase campaign in which each move was designed to force the IDF into an ever-narrowing corridor of impossible choices. Phase 1, the simultaneous strike on Israel's maritime lifelines. At 2:40 a.m. on day 1, Iran did not simply attack ports, they attacked the entire concept of maritime resupply in one coordinated blow. 3 major ports were hit simultaneously. Ashdod, handling 52% of military sea imports, absorbed 29 precision impacts in a 3-2-minute window. The targeting was ruthless in its efficiency. Cranes, fuel piers, and munitions warehouses were struck in sequences calculated to cause irreversible structural failure and internal detonations. Before Israeli commanders could even begin rerouting shipping to Haifa, that port too came under attack. 37 precision strikes focused on fuel storage and rail connections. The Red Sea port, the last remaining alternative, was neutralized with 22 weapons that severed both road and rail links. By sunrise, 88% of Israel's maritime import capacity had vanished. The decision Israel faced at that moment was brutal. They could attempt to fight with existing stocks, or they could pull forces back to conserve supplies. Either choice played directly into Iran's hands. The trap had been sprung. Phase 1 did not just destroy ports, it forced the entire logistics system into a cascading failure that no contingency plan had anticipated. Phase 2, destruction of the overland logistics network. With the ports gone, the natural Israeli response was to shift everything to overland routes. Iran had already anticipated this exact decision. 14 major road bridges on the critical supply arteries were destroyed with precision strikes that achieved complete structural collapse. At the same time, rail lines in the northern corridor were severed at 11 key points. Iranian planners didn't need to destroy every truck, they simply removed the roads and rails those trucks depended on. Now Israeli commanders faced a second, even worse choice: attempt dangerous bypass routes that were slower and more exposed, or accept that large-scale resupply to the fronts was no longer possible. Every hour spent debating this choice burned more fuel and ammunition that could never be replaced. The window for effective maneuver was closing rapidly. Phase 3, neutralization of forward logistics depots. Between hours 18 and 36, Iran struck the forward depots, the hardened stockpiles meant to be the final insurance policy. 12 of the 15 known depots were hit. The 3 that survived were those buried deep in urban areas where collateral damage concerns limited strikes. At this point, the IDF's remaining inventory offered only 4 to 8 days of supply at combat rates. Commanders now had to make the most painful decision of all: continue fighting at full tempo and risk total depletion within days, or begin conserving supplies and surrender the initiative. Every order they issued from this moment forward carried the knowledge that they were spending irreplaceable resources. Phase 4, closing the air resupply lifeline. As American and Israeli planners urgently turned to emergency airlift as the last remaining option, Iran executed Phase 4 with cold precision. Ben-Gurion's runways were struck at 8 separate points with deep penetrating warheads designed to create craters almost impossible to repair under fire. Ramon Airport and the major military airfields were neutralized in the same operational window. The strategic air bridge that Washington had always counted on as the ultimate backstop no longer existed. The United States now faced its own impossible choice: attempt airlift into a non-permissive environment with no secure receiving points, or accept that it could not deliver meaningful help in time. Iran had successfully removed America's strongest card before the game had truly begun. Phase 5. Sustained enforcement of the blockade. The final phase was not a single strike but a relentless campaign of follow-on attacks. Repair crews attempting to fix bridges were themselves targeted. Any attempt at improvised sea transfers was met with immediate interdiction. Every creative workaround the IDF or the U.S. tried was systematically shut down. This phase turned a temporary disruption into a permanent condition. Iran didn't just win the first 5 days, they ensured the logistical collapse would continue for weeks. Every subsequent decision by Israeli and American commanders was made under the crushing weight of dwindling supplies and no realistic prospect of relief. This 5-phase sequence was a masterclass in operational design. At every step, Iran forced their adversary into choices that made the next problem worse. What began as a series of precision strikes ended as the systematic dismantling of an entire logistics architecture that America had spent 50 years and billions of dollars building. Now we reach the human reality behind the strategy, the part that ultimately decides whether an army can still function. You are a brigade commander on day 5. You still have tanks. You still have trained soldiers. But when you look at your fuel status, you realize that if you order a meaningful counterattack, your vehicles will likely run dry within 3 to 4 hours. There will be no resupply. The math is merciless. An armored brigade in sustained combat now burns between 210,000 and 220,000 liters of diesel daily. With 9 brigades deployed, the surviving reserves, already gutted by the port and depot strikes, were projected to last only 3 to 7 days at high intensity. By day 5, multiple units were reporting vehicles immobilized not by enemy action, but by empty tanks. Mobility, the cornerstone of Israeli doctrine, was evaporating in real time. Aviation fuel told an even darker story. Daily consumption hovered between 2.1 and 2.3 million liters. By day 5, sortie rates had been slashed by more than 60%. The F-35 symbols of Israeli technological superiority were being held on the ground or flown on the strictest rationing. Air superiority, long taken for granted, was now being rationed by the litter. Ammunition followed the same trajectory. Artillery battalions were expending 650 to 750 rounds per day. Across multiple fronts, this added up to thousands of tons daily. The surviving forward stocks were enough for only a few more days at reduced intensity. By day 5, several batteries had gone silent, unable to support their own troops. Food, the most human element, became critical. Feeding 170,000 troops requires 420 to 450 tons of rations every day. By day 4, many forward units had moved into emergency reserves. Command reports began documenting measurable declines in physical endurance and decision-making quality. A soldier who is hungry does not think or fight like the soldier commanders train. Medical supplies added the final layer of pressure. Shortages of blood, surgical kits, and antibiotics turned casualty care into a grim exercise in triage. Commanders now had to factor how many wounded we can actually treat into every tactical decision, but the deepest wound was invisible. Modern armies do not usually shatter because they run out of bullets. They erode when soldiers and officers lose the fundamental belief that help is coming. When the ports are known to be destroyed, when the bridges are gone, when the airfields are cratered, and when even American resupply has been rendered impossible, a quiet realization spreads through the ranks. We are on our own, and time is not on our side. That loss of confidence is what breaks armies from within. Not enemy fire, but the slow, grinding knowledge that the logistical system America helped build and promised to sustain had failed faster and more completely than anyone believed possible. This brings us to one of the most uncomfortable questions for American strategists. Why was the United States, with the world's most powerful military logistics network, unable to reverse the collapse in time to save its ally? The answer is not political. It is not a lack of will. It is a matter of cold, unforgiving operational reality. What Iran achieved was not merely an attack on Israel. It was a carefully engineered operational checkmate designed to neutralize America's ability to fulfill its own security guarantees. Washington confronted three insurmountable problems that compounded into a strategic deadlock. First, throughput capacity. Even under emergency conditions, American heavy-lift aircraft such as the C-17 and C-5 can deliver roughly 75 to 80 tons of cargo per sortie. The daily fuel requirement for Israeli air operations alone exceeded 2.1 million liters. Converting that into airlift tonnage, and then adding ammunition, spare parts, medical supplies, and rations for 170,000 troops, the total daily requirement quickly surpassed what the available American strategic airlift fleet could realistically deliver under sustained combat conditions. The mathematics simply did not add up. The entire U.S. Air Force strategic airlift inventory, even if fully mobilized, faced hard physical limits that no amount of urgency could overcome. Second, receiving infrastructure. By the time American planners moved into action, Phase 4 of the Iranian campaign had already destroyed or rendered unusable every major airfield capable of handling heavy cargo aircraft. Ben Gurion's runways were cratered at multiple deep points. Ramon Airport was similarly disabled. The military airfields with adequate ramp space and unloading capacity had been neutralized earlier. American engineering teams can repair damaged runways, but not under continuous threat and not within the narrow time window that a collapsing army required. The very gateways America needed to deliver help had been systematically eliminated. Third, the threat environment. American transport aircraft are large, slow, and highly visible on radar. Operating them into a non-permissive airspace without secure airfields for fighter escort created an unacceptable risk. The same Iranian precision strike and air defense systems that had dismantled Israel's logistics had already demonstrated both the capability and the willingness to engage high-value targets across the theater. This created a deadly circular dependency. Airlift required secure bases, but the bases had already been rendered inoperable. This was not a failure of American will. This was a collision between long-held planning assumptions and harsh operational reality. For decades, U.S. strategy in the Middle East rested on the confident belief that American air and sea power could always deliver decisive resupply when needed. Iran's campaign was specifically designed to invalidate that assumption, striking not just at Israel, but at the credibility of the American security umbrella itself, without triggering direct U.S. combat involvement. In doing so, Iran exposed a vulnerability that many in Washington had long preferred not to examine too closely, that even the greatest logistical power in history has limits when facing a determined, well-planned, and technically competent adversary operating in its own region. The implications of this checkmate extend far beyond this single conflict. Before we conclude, it is worth stepping back from the immediate events to consider the deeper strategic implications, not just for Israel, but for the United States and the entire architecture of American power in the Middle East. For more than 70 years, U.S. strategy in the region has rested on three foundational pillars: technological superiority, overwhelming financial and material support, and most critically, the credible ability to deliver decisive logistical sustainment when our partners face existential pressure. This 5-day campaign did not merely challenge the third pillar, it systematically dismantled it. Each phase of the Iranian operation forced both Israel and the United States into progressively worse decisions. Every contingency plan Washington had prepared was preemptively neutralized. The ports were gone before resupply could begin. The airfields were cratered before heavy-lift aircraft could land. The very assumptions that had guided American planning for decades, that we could always surge fuel, ammunition, and spares when needed, were rendered obsolete in real time. This was not simply a logistics failure. It was a direct stress test of the post-World War II model of extended deterrence. If a determined regional actor, operating with patience and precision, can effectively neutralize America's ability to sustain its closest ally without triggering direct U.S. combat involvement, then the credibility of American security guarantees across the region has been called into question in a fundamental way. This documented scenario forces us to confront several uncomfortable but necessary questions. Are we still investing in the right capabilities for the kind of wars we are likely to face in the coming decades? Do our assumptions about air and sea dominance remain valid in environments where precision strike systems and infrastructure targeting have become far more accessible? And perhaps most importantly, are we prepared to adapt our strategy, our force structure, and our planning assumptions before the next crisis exposes even deeper vulnerabilities in the American way of war? The events of these 5 days were not an isolated tactical setback. They were a strategic warning, a warning that in the 21st century the ability to control and protect supply lines may ultimately prove more decisive than the possession of advanced platforms or superior budgets. For those of us who have dedicated our careers to American national security, this moment demands rigorous, honest reflection, not comfortable rhetoric. The world is changing. The question is whether we are willing to change with it. In conclusion, what unfolded over these 5 days was not merely a localized military setback for Israel. It represents something far more significant, a clear strategic power shift in the Middle East, and a serious warning about the changing nature of modern warfare. Iran did not defeat the IDF on the battlefield through superior firepower. It achieved something more profound. It dismantled the logistical foundation that underpinned Israel's military strength, a foundation built and sustained by American resources, technology, and strategic commitment for over half a century. This was not an isolated incident. It was the demonstration of a new kind of warfare, where precision, planning, and the systematic targeting of supply systems can neutralize even the most advanced militaries. The central lesson for the United States and its allies is sobering. In 21st century conflict, logistics is no longer a supporting function, it is the decisive battlefield. Advanced technology, massive budgets, and sophisticated weapon systems mean very little if the fuel stops flowing, the ammunition runs dry, and the supply lines are severed. Money and hardware cannot overcome the harsh arithmetic of sustained operations when the arteries that deliver them have been cut. In my analysis of this documented scenario, I have examined the reported events with the same rigorous approach I once applied to official contingency planning. What we witnessed in these 5 days may well be studied in war colleges for the next generation, not as an anomaly, but as the new reality of great power competition. For those of us who have spent our lives focused on American national security, this moment demands honest reflection. Are our strategic assumptions still valid? Are we prepared for a world where determined regional actors can effectively neutralize our traditional power projection advantages? I encourage you to think seriously about these questions. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What lessons should America draw from this campaign? How should U.S. strategy adapt in this new environment? Your perspective matters. Thank you for staying with me through this detailed examination. In times of profound change, understanding the quiet mechanics of logistics may be the most important form of strategic wisdom we can possess.